Hi friends, welcome to WafaStudies YouTube channel. This is part 2 in Azure Synapse Analytics playlist. In this video, we are going to discuss about how to pass and resume dedicated SQL pools in the Azure Synapse Analytics using Synapse pipelines. You can also use Data Factory pipelines as well, but in this video, I am going to do it from the Synapse pipelines. Okay, so why we have to pass or resume the dedicated SQL pools? If you have watched my Synapse Analytics playlist videos, you know that whenever you try to create a Synapse dedicated SQL pool, that means you have to allocate some compute power dedicated for that SQL pool. That means some compute, that means some part of the CPU, some part of the RAM, and some part of the processing. So a combined physical or a combined compute unit, you are allocating it or reserving it for your own purpose. Since you are reserving some kind of compute, you have to pay money for it even though if you use it or not. So if you have watched all my Synapse playlist, especially starting few videos, you will be knowing that. So in real time, let's assume if you create a dedicated SQL pool and if you don't pass it after your usage, then since the compute is allocated for you, it is going to charge for you. So you need to make sure, so in real time, right, people tend to have some automation to make sure to pass the dedicated SQL pools maybe every 1 hour, or maybe after once the data loads into the SQL pool, dedicated SQL pool tables, pass it, something like that. So how to do that in a automated automation fashion using a Azure Synapse Analytics Synapse pipelines or using a Data Factory pipeline for that matter. That's what we are going to see in this video. So let me go to portal first. So let me go to Azure portal. So this is Azure portal. Here I have a Synapse Mahir. This is my Synapse workspace name. So inside this Synapse workspace, I have some dedicated SQL pools. So if I go to SQL pools here, uh, I have two dedicated SQL pools. One is SQL pool 1, another one is SQL pool 2. One dedicated SQL pool is on a running status, that means online. Another one is paused. So since it is paused, there is no money associated with it actually. It is not going to bill me. But if you have online, if you even though if you are not using it, it is going to bill you more. So you need to make sure to pass it actually. In real time, it is suggested that pass the dedicated SQL pools after your usages so that you will not end up with a huge amount of billing. So if you want to open this Synapse Analytics workspace in a Synapse Studio, you need to navigate to overview and you need to click this open button to click it. So I have opened my Synapse Studio also here. So if you see here, this is my Synapse Studio where I opened it. So let me zoom little bit so that it will look good here. So here right now I am under management menu under SQL pools. You see the same thing. There are totally 3 SQL pools. One is built-in one which is serverless one. So this we no need to worry. So the dedicated SQL ones, right, whatever you are seeing here. So these two has to be passed. So in this video I am going to show you both the cases, like for example I am going to pass this one and also I am going to resume this one as well. So depending upon your use case in the real time, you can opt for the mechanism whatever suits for you. Okay, so let me do one thing. Let me show you how to do that first. So for that, let me navigate to this pipelines here. So inside the Synapse Studio you have something called pipelines menu. So here let me create a new pipeline. These pipelines are similar to Data Factory pipelines, so we will call it like a Synapse pipelines actually. Okay, so here what we can do is we can make a API calls using a web activity to achieve that. So how to do that, let me practically show you. So first what we have to do is we have to get the dedicated SQL pools for our workspace. So that means getting a list of the dedicated SQL pools, and then once you get it, loop through each dedicated SQL pool and then get the status of it. So let me explain you that one by one. So using web activity we can make a REST API call, that we know. So if you don't know, please watch my Data Factory playlist. So inside this web activity, go to settings. So this is where we can make use of a API call. For the URL field, you can supply the URL of the whatever the REST API you want to call it. So if you go to the REST API documentation, so if you don't know how to search it, so simply search in the like maybe Azure REST APIs documentation, something like that. If you search, it will give you the entire documentation of the every REST APIs. Okay, so here you can scroll down and you can go for a Synapse here. So let me show you that. So let me scroll and let me find the Synapse here. So for every service you will be having a REST APIs defined here. So for Synapse also it is there, and inside the Synapse also, so we are working on a dedicated SQL pools, right? So if you scroll down, you will be having a menu for a SQL pools as well. See here, So there is a menu for the SQL pools, and inside that if you see list by workspace, so this API will give you all the SQL pools of the workspace. So let me copy this REST API first. So let me hit this copy button, and then let me go to notepad. So let me open one notepad. I'm giving you idea like how you have to get a REST API also, so that you don't need to remember this, or you don't need to watch this video again and again. So this is the REST API to which I have to make a API call that will give me all the SQL pools in a workspace, and this is going to be a GET request. And also for this REST API you have to supply, see here you have to replace the subscription ID, then the resource group name, and what is the workspace, give the workspace name. If you give all these values, then it is going to get you all the SQL pools or dedicated SQL pools from that particular workspace. So let me do that. So let me go to my workspace here, and here let me call, see under overview menu I can take the subscription ID from here actually. So let me copy subscription ID, and then let me paste it here. So now I got a subscription ID. The second thing what I want is resource group name. So if you see resource group name is also available here. So let me copy this resource group name and go back to my notepad, and let me paste the resource group name also here. Okay, and then there is something called workspace name, I have to use it. So let me take the workspace name from here. Let me copy this, go back here and paste my workspace name. Now this is the API URL what I have to use to get the SQL pools. So that means name of the SQL pools. So now let me go to web activity here. Let me paste this entire URL here. So and the request is going to be get type. So select the method as get. Okay, and then now to make the API call, you have to use the some authentication mechanism, right? So here if you see under authentication, there are so many types like basic authentication, system assigned managed identity, service principal, lot of things. So I am going to use the system assigned managed identity. That means identity of the workspace itself. That means this is Synapse Mahir has its own identity. So that identity is going to make this API call. So this API call is going to get the SQL pools name, right? So basically what you need to make sure is, you need to make sure whatever the authentication you are using it, or whatever the identity you are using it, that identity should have contributor access on the workspace. Then only it can go and get or read the details of the SQL pools and give you back. So in this case, I am not using a service principal, I am using a managed identity. So this managed identity should have contributor access on the store on the workspace itself. So let me go back to my Azure portal here, and here under the Synapse workspace go to access control, and here I can view the access or check the access. If you want to add access also, you need to hit this add role assignment, and then under role assignment you need to select this contributor role and click next button. And here, so I want to give access to the managed identity, right? So select it. If you want to give access to the service principal, you can go with it. So let me select a managed identity and hit the select members, and here you can select like under workspace Synapse workspaces. So this is the managed identity for which I want to give the access, for which I want to give the contributor access. So I am not going to do that. Why? Because I have already did it. So let me close this panel here, and if I go to here check access, and here if I search for this managed identity, so let me select this Synapse workspace type managed identity, and this is my workspace, right? So let me select it. You can see it has a contributor access, so that's why I'm not going to do it. And if you see the presentation as well, the same thing I have mentioned here. We need to make sure Azure contributor role should be there for the authentication type whatever we are using on the workspace, or else it won't work. That means API call will not work. So let me go back to my the Synapse pipeline here, and here let me do one thing. So I have already given the URL, I have selected the integration runtime. This is like automated default value, that is fine. And authentication type managed identity. This resource URL is the important thing. So from that URL of the API call, take this management.azure.com. So this part is the resource URL actually. So let's paste that here, and now the details filling for the web activity is completed. Now let me debug execute this to make sure whether the API call is getting happen or not, and also we are able to get the SQL pools names also or not. So if you remember, we have two dedicated SQL pools, SQL pool 1 and SQL pool 2. SQL pool 1 is online, SQL pool 2 is already passed. So let me go back here, and here let's wait for the execution to complete. I think execution is still in progress. So let's wait for the execution to complete here. So let me refresh this here. Great. So now our execution of the web activity is completed. So if you see the output JSON of the web activity, you can clearly see that there is a value property which contains array, and inside this array there are totally two items. See, from here to here one item, and then from here to here another item. And if you see the every item under properties, under status, we have the status of the pool, whether it is online or not. And you see there is a name property that says what is the pool name. The same thing in the second item as well. Under properties status, you see the status of the pool which is passed, and the name of the pool is SQL Pool 2. So that means this value array is going to give you the complete details of every pool as a separate item here. So let me do one thing. Let me copy this entire output JSON into one notepad. This is very important because further in the next steps, if you want to write some expression, then these are going to helpful to you. So let me paste it here for that matter. And now let's go back to our implementation. So this web activity is giving me a array of which is with a property called value, and in that array you have both the SQL pools. So now what we have to do is we have to use a for each activity to loop through each dedicated SQL pool. So let me use a for each activity. Let me minimize this, and here let's connect this web activity with a for each, and to the for each activity we have to supply the items of the whatever the data we return from the web activity 1, which is getting the list of the SQL pools. So here let's add the dynamic content. So from the web activity output JSON, there is a property called value in which we are getting all my SQL pools information as an array. So we need to pass this array here. So that is the reason I kept this JSON here, so that I can write these property names properly. So now I am supplying that array to it, and I want to execute the iterations in a sequence order. That means in the first iteration it will take this first item and it will iterate, and in the second iteration it will take this second item and iterate. Okay. So now inside the for each loop, what I have to do is I have to make sure, I have to see whether the SQL pool for that iteration, for example in the first iteration SQL pool will come, let's assume. So what is the status of that particular pool, and based upon the status I need to take a call whether to pass the pool or resume the pool. So if you see in the output JSON, under properties, under status property, you have the status. If it is online, that means SQL pool is already running, so I can make a call of passing this. And if it is a passed here, then I can make a call of resuming back to it. So I can do that very easily. So what I will be doing here in the if condition, I will be checking that property dot status whether it is online or not. So let me go to activities, and here I need to use the expression that will give true or false. If it is a true, it will go inside the true, and inside the true whatever the activity you define, it will run it. If it is false, it will go inside the false, and inside the false whatever the activity you define, it will run it. So under the expression, let me open this add dynamic content. So there is a function called equal. If you see this equals function, and if you see the tooltip, so this equal functions will take the parameters, two parameters, and if both the parameter values matches, then it will return true, or else it will return false. So let me use this equals, and to this equals function, so this is inside the for each loop, right? So inside the for each loop, every item will, so for example in the first iteration this entire item will come from here to here, right? So this entire item will, you can access it using a syntax called @item. So if you have seen all my data factory videos, by this time you know this, or else please watch that. So item is going to represent this entire JSON, and inside the item, so there is a property called properties. Let me copy this. So that's why I kept dot properties dot, then inside the properties there is a property called status. So let me copy this as well, and let me paste this. If this status is going to be online, so let me take this value. If this one is going to, so that means if this entire thing is going to be equals to online, then it will return true. So since I have the @ at the starting, I no need to use it here actually. So this expression is going to give true if this entire value is going to return online. Okay. So let me click OK. So what will happen in the first iteration for the SQL pool? So first iteration is for SQL pool 1. So it has a value called online here. So it is going to become true. So since it is going to become true, inside the true I can do, so right now I am inside the true. If you see here, I can make a API call again to pass that dedicated SQL pool. So here what I can do for this web activity 2, so let me name it like maybe pass SQL pool. So that's what the name I want to give. And here now let me go back to the documentation. There is a pass menu here. If you click here, this is the API that will make sure to pass the dedicated SQL pool. So let me copy this entire REST API URL and let me go back to Notepad here. And so let me go back to Notepad here, and here let me paste this URL here. So now let me do the same thing. Let me take this subscription ID and let me paste this subscription ID here, and then let me take this resource group name, copy, and let me paste this resource group name here, and then let me take the workspace name and let me paste the workspace name also here, and then SQL pool name, right? This SQL pool name will be coming dynamically, right? So let's not touch this now. Inside the expression I will write it. So this is the URL to which we have to make a API call to pass the dedicated SQL pool, and it is going to be a post request, right? So let's go back to our Synapse pipeline here. So let me go back to Synapse pipeline, and here let me go to settings, and here right let me add dynamic content, and let me paste the URL first here. And if you see, the entire URL is fine, and here if you see the SQL pool name we have to still use. So our SQL pool name is coming inside the for each loop, right? So what I will be doing, as I said, in the for each loop, item is going to represent the entire item of the array. So from here to here, so what I will be doing, at the rate, open flavor bracket, close flavor bracket, then item, on item there is a property called name that will give you the SQL pool name. So I am going to use the same thing. So this is going to pass my dedicated SQL pool. Okay. So let me take this part of the URL because I have to use it as a resource URL below. So let me OK hit, and here this is going to be a post method. Whenever you use a post method, you need to make sure to supply the request body. I don't need to supply anything in this case because this API doesn't demand you to supply anything. So I can use a empty array, and here in the authentication type I will be using the system assigned managed identity. That means my own workspace is going to make the URL API call, and here let me paste this management.azure.com URL as a resource URL. So this API call is going to pass the dedicated SQL pool. So let me go back to for each activity here, and now this time, as you remember, if the status is not online, that means already SQL pool is passed maybe. So let's assume. So in that case, what I will be doing, let me go inside the false activity and let me use the web activity once again, and this time I will be resuming this SQL pool. So resume SQL pool, this is what the name I will give, and here under the settings I need to make the API call. Once again, let's go back to the documentation. There is a API call for the resume as well. So let me click this here, let me copy this entire URL, let me go back to Notepad, and here let me paste this entire URL. And if you closely observe the entire URL, if you compare these two URLs, right, everything is exactly same actually. Only difference is this part, resume part. So what I will be doing, let me take this resume part and let me paste it here, and let me copy this entire URL for resuming the SQL pool, and let's go back to our Synapse pipeline, and inside the Synapse pipeline let me hit this add dynamic content and let me paste this entire URL here, and you can see this is resume only. Again the SQL pool name the same thing, we are inside the for each loop, so I can use this item to access the entire item, item, okay, and then on top of it name is the property that will give the SQL pool name, right? So let me select this and let me click OK, and then here once again let me copy this management.azure.com URL because that I have to use it as a resource. So let me hit OK here, and this is also going to be a post request, and then body is empty. See how I am saying post request, see here it is a post request, okay, and then here the authentication type, let me select the system managed authentication only. That means the managed identity of the workspace itself is going to perform this, and let me use this. So that's it. So if I go back to pipeline 2, in the first API call, I am making a API call to get all the SQL pools. Then I am supplying all the SQL pools array to the for each activity here. And then inside the for each activity, I am using a if condition to check the status of the SQL pool here. If the status is online, then I am going to, inside the for each activity, I am going to pass the SQL pool. And if the status is not online, then inside the false, I am going to resume the SQL pool. So right now, if you go back to here, SQL pool 1 is online, SQL pool 2 is passed, right? So if I execute it, this is going to be passed and this is going to be online. So let me go back to my pipeline, and now let me hit this debug button to execute this entire pipeline. So let me minimize everything here, and let's see the execution of this pipeline here closely. My pipeline is running right now. So let's wait for the execution to complete here. If you see here, for the pass, see it is running pass SQL pool right now. And if you see here, the input JSON of the pass SQL pool, and if I expand this, it is executing for SQL pool 1 here. Why? Because SQL pool 1 was running, right? Now it is trying to pass. If I go to management hub, and if you see here, it is trying to pass it here as well, right? So that means the things are working here. So let's go back to our pipeline here, and then let's wait for the execution to fully complete here. Let me minimize this everything, and let's wait for the execution to fully complete here. Great. See, pass SQL pool is already successful. So now if I go to management hub, I should be seeing this is SQL pool is passed, and you see SQL pool 2 is resuming back. Why that is happening? Now right now in my pipeline execution, it is actually trying to run that resume SQL pool wala activity. And if you see the input JSON of this resume SQL pool, and if I expand this, see it is resuming the SQL pool 2. So that is the reason the API call happened, and if I go to management hub, I can see the SQL pool 2 is resuming back. So that means indirectly I can say ki my web API calls are working good, and they are trying to pause and resume the SQL pools. So this kind of flow you can use it inside your ETL pipelines. Maybe at the end of your ETL pipeline, once the data loaded, you can try to pass your dedicated SQL pool, or maybe you can schedule your pipeline to run every 1 hour to make sure all the SQL pools are passed or resumed depending upon your use case. Why this is important is, as I said before, to make sure your billing is good, right? Or else your billing is going to be high. If you don't pass the dedicated SQL pools, even though you are not going to use, it is going to cost you a lot. Okay. Great. Now if you see, all activities are executed successful. Now if I go to management hub, and if I refresh this here, I can clearly see SQL pool 1 is passed now, and SQL 2 pool 2 is online now. So why that happened? Because of my pipeline. So let me pass this anyways, because or else it will going to cost for me as well if I forgot to pass this. So let me, so you can manually pass this also from here, right? If you know the, if you seen the Synapse pipelines or the entire Synapse playlist created by me, by this time you already know. So let me go back to presentation. So that's it guys. I think now you got an idea like how to pass and resume the dedicated SQL pools by making a API calls, and make sure whatever the authentication you are using, that authentication should have this Azure contributor role on the workspace. So that's it in this video. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon to get the notification whenever I add videos. Thank you so much.